This is the story of Charles Ray Crawford, a man who might have been stopped years earlier if only the system had held him accountable. Instead, one young woman's life was stolen, and another family's peace was destroyed, and a small Mississippi town was left with questions that would linger for generations. Welcome to Death Row Diaries, where we investigate the real stories behind America's most haunting capital cases. Tippah County, Mississippi, January 29, 1993. It was a normal day for 20-year-old Kristy Ray, a college student, part-time bank worker, and beloved daughter. Kristy was born in Germany but raised in Mississippi, where she built a life that was simple, bright, and full of promise. That afternoon, she finished her shift at Sunburst Bank alongside her mother, who also worked there. They left together, chatting about dinner plans and weekend errands. At just 20, Kristy was balancing work and classes at Northeast Mississippi Community College. She was kind, ambitious, and grounded, the sort of person that made life around her feel steady. Her mother drove home first, expecting to see Kristy not long after. But when she walked into the family home that late evening, everything felt wrong. The door was slightly open. The living room was in disarray. Her daughter was nowhere to be found. Panic crept in as she searched through the rooms until she found a single piece of paper that made her blood run cold. It was a ransom note. At that moment, the Ray family's world shattered. Kristy had vanished, and the clues pointed to something far darker than a simple robbery. If you're just joining us, this is Death Row Diaries, where we uncover the real stories behind America's darkest crimes. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this story, because what happens next is where the nightmare truly begins. To understand what happened to Kristy Ray, we have to go back 2 years to another violent case that should have ended with Charles Ray Crawford behind bars. Crawford was born in Mississippi in 1966. By his mid-20s, he had already built a life marked by instability, 2 marriages, a child from the second, and a growing record of troubling behavior. But nothing compared to what he did in April of 1991. That spring, he encountered his ex-wife's teenage sister, just 17, and a friend driving near his neighborhood. He offered them a ride. It should have been uneventful, but instead, he took them to an abandoned house. There, he held them at gunpoint. What followed was an assault so violent that both girls barely escaped with their lives. He was arrested and charged with kidnapping, assault, and sexual violence. The community believed justice would finally be served. His trial was set for February 1993, and his bond conditions meant he should have been monitored closely. Yet somehow, Crawford remained free on bail. It was a decision that would cost another young woman her life, because in late January, just 4 days before his court date, Crawford decided he wouldn't wait to see what a jury had to say. On the afternoon of January 29th, Crawford drove into Chaliby, Mississippi, a quiet rural community where Kristy and her family lived. Investigators would later piece together that he intended to burglarize the home. But when Kristy arrived, his plan changed. It's believed that Crawford confronted her inside her own house, forcing her into his car. From there, he drove her to an abandoned barn outside of town. What happened next would remain the subject of forensic evidence and Crawford's own inconsistent statements. Authorities concluded that Kristy was attacked, assaulted, and ultimately killed in cold blood. When her mother discovered the scene of the abduction, police quickly launched a county-wide search. Neighbors described seeing an unfamiliar vehicle near the Ray home earlier that day. And within hours, investigators began connecting dots that would lead them straight to a familiar name: Charles Ray Crawford. But what truly sealed his fate wasn't what the police found, it was what his own family uncovered. That same day, several miles away, Crawford's family stumbled upon something alarming. In their attic, hidden among old boxes, was a handwritten ransom note, eerily similar to the one discovered at Kristy Ray's home. Crawford's mother, wife, and grandfather immediately grew suspicious. They knew about his pending trial, his erratic behavior, and his growing tension in the days leading up to it. Fearing that he might have done something irreversible, they reached out to his defense attorney, William Fortier, and notified the local police. By the time authorities tracked Crawford down, he was near his former father-in-law's house. Officers found him armed with a double-barrel shotgun and a switchblade. His demeanor was calm, almost detached. When questioned, he initially denied everything. He claimed to suffer from memory gaps, so-called blackouts. But as pressure grew, he began to falter. Eventually, he said the words that confirmed what investigators already suspected: "I must have killed her." Then, he led officers to a remote area where they found Kristy's body. If this story has you questioning how justice works, hit the like button. It helps us share these real stories with more people and uncover the lessons that still matter today.
The following months brought one of Mississippi's most closely watched murder trials. The charges against Crawford were extensive: capital murder, rape, burglary, and sexual battery. His defense team argued that he was not fully responsible for his actions due to mental illness. A prison psychiatrist testified that Crawford had suffered depression, memory loss, and possible bipolar disorder. They described a man haunted by inner turmoil, someone who had been treated with psychiatric medication and hospitalized for mental instability years earlier. But the prosecution's experts painted a very different picture. They called psychologists who testified that Crawford had acted with purpose and planning, that he knew right from wrong, and that his actions were calculated, not impulsive. One forensic psychiatrist went further, stating that Crawford's supposed amnesia was not genuine. The evidence against him was overwhelming: the ransom notes, his confession, the physical evidence, and his previous pattern of violence. After a 2-week trial, on April 22, 1994, the jury returned its verdict. Charles Ray Crawford was found guilty on all counts. The following day, April 23, 1994, the same jury recommended that Crawford be sentenced to death for the capital murder of Kristy Ray. The judge agreed. Crawford received a death sentence, plus a life term without parole for the related rape charge, and additional decades for burglary and sexual battery. In a separate case, he was also convicted of the earlier assault on his ex-wife's teenage sister, earning him another 46 years in prison. For the Ray family, it was both relief and heartbreak. Justice had been served, but nothing could restore what had been lost. For Crawford, the long road of appeals was just beginning. And for the next 30 years, his name would remain buried in court filings and legal motions as he fought every aspect of his conviction and sentence. In March 1998, the Mississippi Supreme Court dismissed Crawford's direct appeal. Years later, in 2013, the Fifth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals upheld his conviction and death sentence. He appealed again to the U.S. Supreme Court, but in February 2014, the justices declined to intervene. Even after that, Crawford continued to challenge another part of his record, the 1991 rape conviction that had preceded Kristy's murder. His lawyers claimed ineffective counsel and due process violations, but time after time, state and federal courts rejected his appeals.
By 2024, those decades of filings had all led to the same conclusion. Charles Ray Crawford's guilt was not in doubt, and his death sentence stood firm. 30 years after Kristy Ray's death, the final chapter of this case was about to begin. In November 2024, Mississippi's Attorney General, Lynn Fitch, filed a motion with the state Supreme Court asking for an execution date for Crawford. By then, every avenue of appeal had been exhausted. When the justices agreed, they set a date, October 15, 2025. For the Ray family, it marked the end of a long and painful wait. For Crawford, it was the day he would finally face the punishment decided more than 30 years earlier. In the weeks leading up to his scheduled execution, his attorneys filed one last appeal with the U.S. Supreme Court, seeking a stay. But as of October 7th, the court had not intervened, and the state of Mississippi prepared to carry out its first execution in over a year. There were no more legal loopholes left, no more motions to file. The system that had once released him on bail was now ready to hold him accountable, permanently. What do you think? Should someone who has spent more than 30 years appealing a death sentence still be granted time? Or does justice demand finality? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The story of Charles Ray Crawford is one of violence, delay, and the slow grind of justice. A man who might have been stopped years earlier was allowed to walk free, and in that brief window, an innocent life was destroyed. Kristy Ray's murder wasn't just the act of one individual. It was the result of a system that failed to act when it mattered most. Her story serves as a painful reminder that even in small towns, beneath the surface of ordinary life, danger can exist in the form of someone who has already shown what they're capable of. More than 30 years later, as Mississippi prepares to carry out Crawford's sentence, the question isn't whether justice has been done. It's whether it came far too late. Because in the end, time caught up with Charles Ray Crawford. But for Kristy Ray's family, no sentence, no court decision, and no execution date will ever bring their daughter home.